Hi students. Um, what I wanted to do in this video is just tell you a story about what I did when I was in college and struggling with reading poetry. If you've taken my English 101 class, you've heard me tell this story, so I'm sorry you have to hear it again. Okay, so when I was in college, I really wanted to understand poetry. It seemed to me like a lot of the most intelligent people I knew read and appreciated poetry, and I really wanted to too. Um, and so I took a poetry class, and when I was reading the poems, I just felt really confused. It felt like gibberish to me. I didn't get it, and I was super frustrated, and I felt really stupid, um, and I kind of didn't know what to do. So what I did is I went to my teacher, who was kind of a famous poet, so I was a little intimidated, and I told him I'm just like really struggling with this. I really don't get it. And he gave me a really good suggestion. He said, "Don't worry about it too much. Just keep reading poems." And he suggested that at night before I went to bed that I just like pick up a book of poetry and just read through it and not worry if I got it or I didn't get it. Just read some poems. And he says eventually you'll find a poem um, that you like. And you might just like the sound of it. You might not actually know what it means or anything like that. You might just like the way it sounds. He goes, and that's fine. And then he suggested that I memorize that poem. So I took his advice. I started just reading poems before I went to bed at night. And finally, one night, I came across this poem by the poet Emily Dickinson. Um, and it started off there's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Um, and I had no idea what that meant, but I thought it was beautiful. And it was a very short poem, so I was like, well, I can memorize this. So I memorized the rest of the poem. Um, and I would just say it to myself every once in a while, not knowing what it meant, but just liking the sound of it. And I was going to college in New York City, and a few months later, after I memorized the poem, I was in my dorm room, and the light was coming in really low from the window. It was like, late fall. And I was starting to think about how the days get shorter in winter and how kind of depressing that is, and how the angle of light, changes in the winter. And all of a sudden, I thought, there's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. And all of a sudden, I realized that this poem I'd memorized was about exactly that. Emily Dickinson was sort of noticing the way the light comes in lower in winter. And it kind of reminds us that things die and we're going to die. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses, that kind of weighs us down like cathedral tunes. For cathedral tunes, I sort of thought of organ music, which is really heavy and somber. And I thought, oh, she's feeling what I'm feeling. Like I was feeling kind of depressed about the shorter days and how depressing that time of year could be for me sometimes. And she was having that same feeling. And she lived 200 years before me, or actually 100 years before me. And we were connecting about this human experience. So at that moment, that poem kind of cracked open for me like an egg. And I got it. And the reason I always want to tell my students that story is because reading a poem is not like reading an instruction manual or reading Harry Potter. It's something that you kind of need to linger over and think about and come back. This is one of the reasons I'm having you memorize a poem in this class, so that you're forced to linger over a poem. So my point is simply that try to have patience with these poems. Some of them will open up to you, some of them might not. But over time, your relationship to them can change, which is one of the most exciting things I think about reading literature. So try to be patient, try not to be afraid of the confusion. And if all you can start with in a poem is that you like the way it sounds or you like a particular image, that's a way in.